Daniel Kinahan, a name whispered in the shadows, a figure shrouded in controversy. Born in Dublin, Ireland in 1977, Kinahan rose from humble beginnings to become a notorious figure in the world of organized crime. His father, Christy Kinahan Sr., was the alleged head of the Kinahan cartel, a notorious drug trafficking organization with tentacles reaching across Europe and beyond. Growing up amidst the illicit dealings of his family, young Daniel was exposed to a life of crime from a tender age. He witnessed firsthand the power and wealth that came with controlling the narcotics trade, a seductive poison that would leave an indelible mark on his psyche. As Daniel matured, he immersed himself in the family business, proving to be an astute and ruthless operator. He quickly ascended the ranks, earning a fearsome reputation for his intelligence, ruthlessness, and ability to evade the clutches of law enforcement. His cunning and ambition knew no bounds as he sought to expand the cartel's empire. However, Daniel's ambitions extended far beyond the gritty underworld of drug trafficking. He sought legitimacy, a way to sanitize his tainted reputation and gain access to the upper echelons of society. His discerning eye fell upon the glamorous and lucrative world of professional boxing, a sport rife with money, power, and the potential for manipulation. Recognizing the inherent vulnerabilities within the sport, its susceptibility to exploitation, and the desperation of young fighters seeking fame and fortune, Kinahan saw an opportunity to reinvent himself. He would leverage his ill-gotten gains, his network of contacts, and his ruthless business acumen to establish himself as a major player in the boxing world. Little did anyone know that this seemingly innocuous foray into the sweet science would set in motion a chain of events that would rock the sport to its core, leaving an enduring legacy of controversy, violence, and corruption. This is the story of Daniel Kinahan's rise and fall within the world of boxing, a cautionary tale of ambition, greed, and the seductive allure of power. Boxing, often referred to as the sweet science, is a sport steeped in tradition, grit, and raw human emotion. From the smoky backrooms of local gyms to the dazzling lights of Las Vegas mega casinos, the fight game has captivated audiences for centuries. Yet beneath the glamour and spectacle lies a cutthroat business, a complex web of promoters, managers, trainers, and fighters, all vying for their share of the spoils. It is a world where loyalty is often fleeting, promises are easily broken, and fortunes can be won and lost on the edge of a razor-sharp glove. Daniel Kinahan, with his innate understanding of power dynamics and his ruthless pursuit of profit, saw an opportunity to exploit the vulnerabilities of this unforgiving industry. He recognized that many young fighters, often hailing from disadvantaged backgrounds, possessed immense talent, but lacked the guidance and support to navigate the treacherous waters of professional boxing. They were easy prey for unscrupulous individuals looking to exploit their raw talent for personal gain. Kinahan positioned himself as a savior, a benevolent benefactor offering these vulnerable athletes a path to greatness. He established MTK Global, a boxing management company that promised to nurture talent and secure lucrative fights for its stable of fighters. With his vast wealth and connections, Kinahan quickly assembled an impressive roster of boxers, luring them with promises of financial security, world title shots, and a level of influence they could only dream of. Word spread throughout the boxing community, and soon MTK Global became a force to be reckoned with, representing some of the biggest names in the sport. MTK Global, under Kinahan's guidance, rapidly rose to prominence in the boxing world. The company, initially established in Spain, quickly gained a reputation for securing lucrative fights and managing the careers of promising young fighters. Their stable of boxers grew exponentially, attracting both established names and up-and-coming prospects eager to benefit from Kinahan's purported Midas touch. MTK's success was undeniable, their fighters consistently climbing the ranks, capturing titles, and commanding ever-increasing purses. The company's business model, however, drew scrutiny from some quarters. Critics questioned the source of Kinahan's wealth and the nature of his influence within the sport. Rumors of his criminal past, whispers of his family's notoriety, followed him like a shadow, casting a pall over MTK's achievements. Despite the growing concerns, Kinahan remained a largely elusive figure. Preferring to operate from the shadows, his influence felt rather than seen. He cultivated an aura of mystery, rarely giving interviews and shunning the limelight. His public persona was carefully crafted, a carefully curated image of a legitimate businessman, a boxing aficionado, a patron of the sport. He was often pictured with high-profile fighters, his arm draped around their shoulders, a wide smile plastered on his face. These carefully staged photo opportunities, disseminated through social media and sports websites, served to normalize his presence within the boxing world, to paint him as a respected figure, a power broker, a man to be reckoned with. Many within the sport, blinded by his apparent success and the financial rewards he brought, chose to ignore the whispers, the rumors, the nagging doubts about his true nature. Kinahan's influence, however, extended far beyond the ring. He played a pivotal role in brokering deals, negotiating contracts, and securing broadcast rights. His reach was pervasive, his tentacles extending into every facet of the sport. He became the go-to man, the fixer, the one who could make things happen, for better or for worse. Fighters, managers, and promoters alike sought his favor, eager to curry favor with the man who seemingly held the keys to the kingdom. The lines between Kinahan's legitimate business dealings and his alleged criminal enterprises blurred, the boundaries becoming increasingly indistinct. Money, as it often does, had a way of obscuring the truth, of silencing dissent, and of buying loyalty. The boxing world, for all its claims of integrity and fair play, proved to be as susceptible to corruption as any other. Kinahan, the master manipulator, had successfully infiltrated the sport, embedding himself within its very fabric. Daniel Kinahan's influence within boxing grew alongside MTK Global's roster. He was often seen in the company of elite fighters, further solidifying his image as a power broker within the sport. One of the most notable figures linked to Kinahan was Tyson Fury, the flamboyant and ferociously talented heavyweight champion of the world. Fury, known for his larger-than-life personality and undeniable boxing prowess, publicly thanked Kinahan for his role in securing a lucrative fight deal, propelling the Irishman further into the spotlight. Billy Joe Saunders, another British world champion boxer, was also closely associated with Kinahan. Saunders, a skilled and often controversial fighter, was managed by MTK Global and frequently expressed his gratitude for Kinahan's support and guidance. Social media became a platform for fighters to showcase their connections to Kinahan. Pictures of them together at training camps, social gatherings, and even family events flooded the internet. These images, often accompanied by captions praising Kinahan's character and business acumen, served to further normalize his presence within the sport and enhance his public image. Promoters, too, were eager to align themselves with Kinahan, recognizing the influence he wielded within the sport. Eddie Hearn, one of boxing's most successful promoters, admitted to having dealt with Kinahan in the past, acknowledging his involvement in negotiations for several high-profile fights. The boxing world, it seemed, was happy to turn a blind eye to Kinahan's shadowy past as long as the money kept flowing and the fights kept happening. His influence permeated every level of the sport, from the gyms where young hopefuls honed their skills to the glittering arenas where titles were won and lost. The more successful Kinahan became, the more brazen he became, seemingly operating with impunity, his power unchecked. He had successfully infiltrated the highest echelons of boxing, becoming an integral part of its machinery. Despite Kinahan's carefully constructed facade of legitimacy, whispers of his criminal past and the source of his wealth persisted. Journalists and law enforcement agencies continued to investigate his activities, piecing together a complex web of alleged criminal enterprises. The Kinahan cartel, headed by Daniel's father, Christy Kinahan Sr., was suspected of being one of the most powerful drug trafficking organizations in Europe, with links to money laundering, arms smuggling, and a string of violent crimes. Reports emerged linking Daniel Kinahan directly to the cartel's operations, alleging that he had assumed a leadership role following his father's move to Dubai. In 2016, a significant event occurred that would cast a long shadow over Kinahan's burgeoning boxing empire. A brazen attack took place at a boxing weigh-in at the Regency Hotel in Dublin, shocking the world and exposing the dark underbelly of Kinahan's alleged criminal activities. Gunmen stormed the hotel disguised as police officers and opened fire, their intended target believed to be a rival gang member. The attack resulted in the death of an innocent bystander, sending shockwaves through Ireland and beyond. The Regency Hotel shooting, as it became known, shone a harsh spotlight on the brutal reality of gangland violence and raised serious questions about Daniel Kinahan's alleged involvement in organized crime. The Regency Hotel shooting sent shockwaves through the boxing world, shattering the carefully curated image of Daniel Kinahan as a legitimate businessman and boxing aficionado. The brazen attack, carried out in broad daylight during a high-profile boxing event, exposed the brutal reality of Kinahan's alleged criminal connections and the dangers associated with his presence within the sport. Images of the gunmen, disguised as police officers, storming the hotel, their weapons drawn, were broadcast around the world, forever tainting the sport with the spectre of violence. The Irish government, long aware of the Kinahan cartel's activities, launched a full-scale investigation into the shooting, vowing to bring those responsible to justice. The authorities described the cartel as a sophisticated criminal organization involved in drug trafficking, money laundering, and a string of violent crimes, with operations spanning across Europe and beyond. Daniel Kinahan, once a shadowy figure operating in the background, was now thrust into the spotlight, his name synonymous with the violence that had erupted in Dublin. Despite the mounting evidence and the public outcry, Kinahan maintained his innocence, denying any involvement in the Regency Hotel shooting or any other criminal activities. He retreated to Dubai, a haven for the wealthy and well-connected, where he continued to operate his boxing empire from afar. His influence within the sport, however, remained seemingly intact. Fighters continued to sign with MTK Global, promoters continued to negotiate deals with him, and broadcasters continued to air fights involving his fighters. The boxing world, it seemed, was reluctant to sever ties with Kinahan, despite the growing controversy surrounding him. Some argued that boxing, with its long history of shady characters and underworld connections, was immune to moral outrage. Others claimed that Kinahan's alleged crimes were irrelevant, that his business dealings within the sport were separate from his personal life. Whatever the rationale, the decision to continue doing business with Kinahan would come back to haunt the sport, further tarnishing its reputation and raising serious questions about its ethical compass. Despite the mounting pressure and negative publicity surrounding the Regency Hotel shooting, Daniel Kinahan remained a powerful force in boxing. He seemed untouchable, his influence seemingly impervious to the storm raging around him. Some dubbed him the Teflon Don of boxing, a moniker that spoke to his uncanny ability to emerge from scandal unscathed. Kinahan continued to manage the careers of some of the biggest names in the sport, securing lucrative fights and negotiating multi-million-dollar deals. His fighters continued to win, their victories adding to his aura of invincibility. Social media became a battleground, with Kinahan's supporters and detractors engaging in fierce debates about his character and his alleged criminal connections. Fighters loyal to Kinahan, often those who had benefited financially from their association with him, publicly defended him, praising his character and business acumen. They argued that he was a positive influence in their lives, providing them with opportunities they would not have had otherwise. Critics, however, were quick to point out the hypocrisy of these endorsements, accusing these fighters of turning a blind eye to Kinahan's alleged crimes in exchange for financial gain. The boxing media, too, was divided. Some journalists, particularly those based in Ireland and the UK, continued to investigate Kinahan's alleged criminal activities, publishing exposés detailing his family's history and his alleged role in the Kinahan cartel. Others, however, adopted a more cautious approach, wary of legal repercussions or perhaps influenced by the financial power Kinahan wielded within the sport. This reluctance to fully confront the Kinahan issue allowed him to maintain a veneer of respectability, further entrenching his position within boxing. Daniel Kinahan's influence extended far beyond the shores of Ireland and the UK. He had cultivated a global network of contacts, forging alliances with promoters, managers, and fighters from all corners of the world. This international reach allowed him to circumvent attempts to isolate him, ensuring that MTK Global continued to thrive despite the growing controversy surrounding its founder. In the Middle East, Kinahan found a welcoming environment, particularly in Dubai, where he had established a base of operations. He was often pictured with high-ranking officials and members of the business elite, further solidifying his image as a man of power and influence. Kinahan's connections in the Middle East also proved invaluable in securing lucrative fights for his fighters, with the region becoming a popular destination for high-profile boxing events. The influx of money from the Middle East, often from sources that were not subject to the same level of scrutiny as those in traditional boxing markets, further strengthened Kinahan's position and made it even more difficult for the sport to distance itself from him. In Eastern Europe, Kinahan tapped into a rich vein of boxing talent, signing promising young fighters from countries like Russia, Ukraine, and Kazakhstan. These fighters, often hailing from disadvantaged backgrounds, were drawn to the promise of financial security and the opportunity to compete on a global stage that Kinahan offered. However, this expansion into new territories also raised concerns about the potential exploitation of vulnerable athletes and the lack of transparency in Kinahan's business dealings. Despite his seeming invincibility, the walls were slowly beginning to close in on Daniel Kinahan. The Irish government, relentless in its pursuit of the Kinahan cartel, had made significant progress in its investigation into the organization's criminal activities. Law enforcement agencies across Europe and the United States were cooperating in a coordinated effort to dismantle the cartel, sharing intelligence and coordinating raids on its suspected operations. The net was tightening, and the pressure was mounting on Kinahan even in his Dubai sanctuary. In 2022, the United States government took a significant step in its efforts to disrupt the Kinahan cartel, imposing sanctions on Daniel Kinahan, his father Christy Kinahan Sr., and his brother Christopher Kinahan Jr. The sanctions, which froze any assets they held within U.S. jurisdiction and prohibited U.S. citizens from engaging in any transactions with them, sent shockwaves through the boxing world. The U.S. Treasury Department, in its announcement of the sanctions, described the Kinahan cartel as a transnational criminal organization involved in drug trafficking, money laundering, firearms trafficking, and murder. The U.S. government's actions had a seismic impact on Kinahan's standing within boxing, promoters and broadcasters now facing legal repercussions for associating with a sanctioned individual were forced to distance themselves from him. MTK Global, the boxing management company he had founded, announced its closure, citing the unprecedented pressure it was facing. The U.S. Treasury Department's decision to impose sanctions on Daniel Kinahan and his associates sent shockwaves through the boxing world. The news reverberated across the globe, dominating headlines and sparking a long-overdue reckoning for the sport. No longer could promoters, managers, and fighters claim ignorance or plead indifference. The U.S. government, with its vast resources and global reach, had drawn a line in the sand, making it abundantly clear that doing business with Daniel Kinahan was no longer an option. The sanctions, announced in April 2022, targeted not only Daniel Kinahan but also his father, Christy Kinahan Sr., and his brother, Christopher Kinahan Jr., effectively dismantling the upper echelons of the Kinahan organized crime group. The Treasury Department, in its official statement, described the Kinahan cartel as a significant transnational criminal organization involved in a litany of illicit activities, including drug trafficking, money laundering, firearms trafficking, and murder. These sanctions, the culmination of years of investigation by law enforcement agencies across multiple continents, were a testament to the cartel's reach and the severity of its crimes. The impact on boxing was immediate and profound. MTK Global, the boxing management company Kinahan had founded, announced its closure just days after the sanctions were announced. The company, once a powerhouse in the sport, representing some of the biggest names in boxing, crumbled under the weight of its association with Kinahan. Promoters, too, scrambled to distance themselves from the sanctioned Irishman. Eddie Hearn, one of boxing's most powerful promoters, who had previously admitted to having dealings with Kinahan, publicly stated that he would no longer do business with him or any fighters associated with him. The sanctions sent a clear message. Associating with Daniel Kinahan, regardless of his influence or connections, was no longer acceptable. The boxing world, for years content to turn a blind eye to his alleged criminal activities, was now forced to confront the consequences of its inaction. The imposition of sanctions against Daniel Kinahan triggered a wave of introspection within the boxing world. The sport, long plagued by accusations of corruption, exploitation, and underworld influence, was forced to confront its demons. The cozy relationship between boxing and organized crime, often whispered about in hushed tones, was now on full display, impossible to ignore. The question on everyone's lips was simple yet profound. How had Daniel Kinahan, a man with well-documented links to organized crime, managed to infiltrate the highest echelons of boxing? The answers were complex and multifaceted, pointing to systemic issues within the sport. Boxing, with its decentralized structure and reliance on a complex web of promoters, managers, and sanctioning bodies, has always been vulnerable to exploitation. The lure of money, often from dubious sources, has always been a powerful motivator in boxing. For young fighters, many hailing from impoverished backgrounds, the promise of wealth and fame can be intoxicating, blinding them to the potential dangers of associating with unscrupulous individuals. Kinahan, with his vast wealth and connections, was a master at exploiting these vulnerabilities, offering fighters lucrative contracts and opportunities that were hard to resist. The culture of silence within boxing also played a role in Kinahan's rise to power. Fear of retribution, both physical and professional, kept many within the sport from speaking out against him, even as his influence grew and the allegations against him mounted. The imposition of sanctions, however, shattered this code of silence, emboldening some within boxing to speak out against Kinahan and the corrupting influence he had on the sport. The Kinahan saga exposed a harsh truth about the boxing world. Silence often comes at a price. For years, Many within the sport turned a blind eye to Daniel Kinahan's alleged criminal activities, choosing to focus on the money and opportunities he brought to the table. Fighters, managers, promoters, and even journalists benefited either directly or indirectly from their association with him. However, the US government's decision to impose sanctions on Kinahan shattered this illusion of normalcy, forcing the boxing world to confront the consequences of its complicity. The sanctions sent a clear message: associating with known criminals, regardless of their perceived influence or wealth, has consequences. Promoters who had previously worked with Kinahan now faced legal repercussions. Fighters who had publicly praised him were forced to distance themselves or risk jeopardizing their careers. The media too was held accountable, with some outlets facing criticism for their past coverage of Kinahan, which some viewed as too lenient or even sympathetic. The Kinahan saga served as a stark reminder that turning a blind eye to wrongdoing, even in the name of self-preservation or financial gain, can have far-reaching consequences. The damage to boxing's reputation, already tarnished by numerous scandals over the years, was significant. The sport was now forced to confront its demons and embark on a long and arduous journey of reform. The price of silence, it turned out, was far greater than anyone had imagined. Daniel Kinahan's legacy within boxing is a complex and controversial one. On the one hand, there's no denying the impact he had on the sport. He was instrumental in the rise of MTK Global, a management company that represented some of the biggest names in boxing and played a significant role in shaping the landscape of the sport. He was known for his business acumen, his ability to secure lucrative fights for his fighters, and his knack for brokering deals that benefited all parties involved. However, Kinahan's accomplishments in boxing will forever be overshadowed by his alleged criminal activities. The shadow of the Kinahan organized crime group, with its alleged involvement in drug trafficking, money laundering and violence, hangs heavy over his legacy. The Regency Hotel shooting in Dublin, a brazen act of violence that shocked the world and exposed the dark underbelly of the boxing world, will forever be linked to his name. The US government's decision to impose sanctions on Kinahan, effectively banishing him from the sport, marked the end of an era. His downfall served as a cautionary tale about the seductive allure of power, the dangers of unchecked ambition, and the high cost of compromising one's morals. The boxing world, forever marked by the Kinahan saga, was left to grapple with the fallout, determined to learn from its mistakes and chart a new course for the future. The legacy of Daniel Kinahan in boxing is a stark reminder that even in the world of sport, where dreams are pursued and heroes are made, the lines between glory and infamy can be blurred, and the price of success can be devastatingly high. The US sanctions were a devastating blow to Daniel Kinahan's carefully constructed empire. The man who had once seemed untouchable, operating with impunity in the shadows of the boxing world, was now an international pariah. His name, once whispered in hushed tones of respect and fear, was now uttered with a mixture of disdain and pity. The boxing world, so quick to embrace his wealth and influence, now distanced itself with equal haste. Fighters who had once sung his praises, their careers bolstered by his patronage, were now scrambling to erase any association with him. Social media accounts were scrubbed clean of any mention of his name, photographs capturing their once close relationships hastily deleted. The fear of guilt by association, of being tainted by his toxic legacy, was palpable. Promoters, those shrewd businessmen who had once courted his favor, now shunned him like the plague. Doors that had once swung open at his mere suggestion were now slammed shut, the welcome mat abruptly withdrawn. The risk of being linked to a sanctioned individual of jeopardizing lucrative broadcasting deals and international partnerships was simply too great. Even Dubai, the glittering oasis that had provided him with refuge and a veneer of respectability, no longer offered sanctuary. The United Arab Emirates, keen to protect its image as a global hub for business and tourism, froze Kinahan's assets within its borders, signaling that his presence was no longer welcome. The man who had once seemed to operate above the law, his influence stretching across continents, was now a fugitive. His movements restricted, his options dwindling. The walls were closing in, the net tightening around him, as law enforcement agencies across the globe, emboldened by the US sanctions, intensified their efforts to bring him to justice. The end of the road was in sight. The Kinahan saga cast a long shadow over the sport of boxing, exposing its vulnerabilities and forcing a long overdue reckoning. The sport, with its history of corruption, exploitation, and shadowy figures operating in the background, was now under intense scrutiny. The public, once captivated by the spectacle of two warriors battling for supremacy in the ring, was now privy to the dark underbelly of the fight game. The question on everyone's mind was, could boxing redeem itself? Could it shed its image as a haven for criminals and exploiters and emerge as a sport worthy of respect and admiration? The answer, as with most things in life, was far from simple. Reform, both systemic and cultural, was desperately needed. The decentralized nature of the sport, with its myriad sanctioning bodies and often conflicting interests, had created a breeding ground for corruption. A more unified approach, with stricter regulations and greater transparency, was essential to restoring public trust. The exploitation of young fighters, often lured into the sport with promises of wealth and fame, only to be discarded when their bodies were broken or their usefulness had expired, had to end. Greater protections for fighters, both financially and medically, were paramount. The media, too, had a role to play. Journalists, often complicit in perpetuating the myth of the charming rogue, the lovable gangster, needed to hold those in power accountable, shining a light on the dark corners of the sport and refusing to be complicit in its exploitation. The Kinahan saga, while a dark chapter in the history of boxing, offered a chance for redemption, an opportunity for the sport to confront its demons and emerge stronger, cleaner, and more equitable. The road to redemption would be long and arduous, but the future of the sport depended on it. Daniel Kinahan's shadow still looms large over the sport of boxing, a stark reminder of the fragility of its integrity and the ever-present threat of corruption. His rise and fall serve as a cautionary tale, a stark illustration of how easily the lines between the legitimate world of sport and the dark underbelly of organized crime can become blurred. The boxing ring, a place of dreams and aspirations, of grit and determination, was also a stage where Kinahan, for a time, played the role of kingmaker, his influence shaping the destinies of fighters and the course of the sport itself. The scars of the Kinahan era run deep. The sport's reputation, already tarnished by past scandals, suffered a grievous blow. The public's trust shaken by the revelations of his alleged criminal enterprise and the complicity of those who chose to turn a blind eye. The US government's decision to impose sanctions on Kinahan, a move that sent shockwaves through the boxing world, was a watershed moment, a stark reminder that the reach of the law extends even into the glamorous and often shadowy world of professional sport. The road to redemption for boxing is a long and arduous one. Systemic change is needed, a root and branch overhaul of the sport's governance, transparency, and accountability. The days of turning a blind eye to suspicious characters and questionable dealings are over. The fight against corruption and exploitation must be relentless, a collective effort involving everyone from promoters and managers to fighters and fans. The future of boxing hangs in the balance. The sport can either learn from the mistakes of the past, emerging stronger and more resilient, or it can continue down a path of self-destruction, its legacy forever tarnished by the shadows of greed, corruption, and violence. The choice is clear. The time for action is now.